Hello and welcome to this CNN special, the Steve Bannon interview. I'm Fareed Zakaria in Rome. Bannon came to worldwide attention in August of 2016 when he was named the CEO of Donald Trump's presidential campaign. After President Trump's victory and inauguration, Bannon was named chief strategist at the White House, reporting only to the president. But for many, he was also the chief ideologist of a nationalist, protectionist populism that he championed when heading up Breitbart News. His ambition then and now is nothing less than to remake conservatism not only in America but around the world, and thus remake politics. But Bannon, who has been everything from a Goldman Sachs executive to a movie producer, was said to have clashed often with other White House officials, including the president's family. So not even a year into his job, Steve Bannon was fired. When he was dismissed, Bannon didn't disappear from the public eye. He resumed his post as executive chairman at Breitbart, the conservative news outlet, and continued to give advice to the president. Then in January, Michael Wolff's provocative inside account of the White House, Fire and Fury, was published. Bannon was a chief source for the book, which painted the president in a less than flattering light. Trump had enough. In a statement, he said that when Bannon was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind. After his presidential dressing down, Bannon also resigned from Breitbart, but has continued to work to spread his brand of populism and is in high demand all over Europe, especially in Italy. He invited me here to Rome to interview him. Why Rome? For a place that's often been accused of being chaotic, Italian politics are more chaotic than ever. And what's caused all the trouble is a recent election win by Italy's populists, whom Bannon has been supporting. We'll dig into all that with Steve Bannon later in the show. Over the next hour, you will hear his thoughts on the wave of populism rising around the world, on the Republicans' chances in the midterm elections back home, and on his former boss, President Donald Trump. Here is my exclusive interview. Steve Bannon, pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Fareed.
You said that you thought that Don Jr.'s meeting with the Russians in Trump Tower was treasonous.
Yep.
And you said somebody should call the FBI. Well, in a sense, somebody did.
But then I did make a that about Manafort.
But I want to ask you a question about the issue, though, the substance, not the.
Yeah.
In a sense, Rod Rosenstein called the FBI in the sense that he appointed somebody to investigate. That guy's name is Bob Mueller.
Yeah.
Isn't that good? And shouldn't that process be allowed to continue?
By the way, I've been a big proponent of Mueller. I was the guy that said, "Don't fire Comey. This thing's petering out." I said it's the C block on Anderson Cooper. Nobody's interested anymore. It'll be done in 90 days, and we'll be done with it. Okay, but
I have to protest that. Lots of people watch the C block on Anderson Cooper.
No. But I'm saying the energy by the time you get to the C block, when Anderson's got something, it's in the A block. If you fire him, you're going to special prosecutor. I've been a big proponent of Mueller. I've gone to be part of that as a witness of fact. I've always said, he's a combat Marine, great individual. That ought to play out as it's going to play out. Now, where I have a problem, and a huge problem, I was the guy that said publicly that Ty Cobb should be fired. Okay, he gave the president, I thought, terrible advice, and I actually think lied to the president consistently about what the nature of this investigation was and the timing of it and giving overall documents. Remember, unlike all the precedents set with every other president, we willingly went and gave over 1 million pages of documents and allowed the White House counsel, the chief of staff, the chief strategist, the head of communications to expedite this, which I thought was not wise. Okay, but I said Cobb should be fired, and I also said, and I was a guy that supported Rosenstein. I was there when Sessions brought him up as the guy to be supported, that he should be terminated. And here's why. Not Mueller, but Rosenstein. And here's what I think the focus ought to now be, is that the President of the United States is the chief law enforcement officer of the country. He ought to order Rosenstein to do what Devin Nunes news and to release every document associated with Stephen Halper and all these people associated with whatever happened in Cambridge. Okay? We ought to see, and by the way, not to CNN, not to the New York Times, not the Washington Post, or the White House, to give it to the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. We have to find out all the paperwork, who got paid, what happened when a spy and a recruiter of spies, which appears from public things Halper is.
So
okay, by the way,
let me ask you
if
about
Rosenstein doesn't do it, He should be terminated.
Let me ask you about Rosenstein's boss. You were instrumental in getting Sessions to endorse Donald Trump. That was the first, people forget now, he was the first senior Republican to endorse Donald Trump.
We're very close.
Donald Trump now says he wishes he had picked another attorney general. Is Donald Trump right?
I think the president is wrong. I think the president has been wrong from the beginning about, if I can respectfully disagree with the president of the United States. I think that, I think the whole concept of recusal is not even an issue. I think that Rudy Giuliani or Christie or Jeff Sessions, anybody associated with the campaign would have had to recuse themselves before Grassley's committee even voted them out to go to the floor for a vote. So I think the recusal is an issue, yes, an issue that was dealt with and had to be dealt with. And whether you picked Rudy or Christie, and by the way, this thing about Sessions was not the first pick. Rudy was always the first pick. Jeff Sessions and Rudy all in one as Secretary of State, okay? So even Rudy knew at the time there was going to be this issue of recusal. So I think the president's wrong. I think if you look at what Jeff Sessions has done on immigration, on migration, and all the key issues at the Justice Department, I think Sessions has personally done an excellent job. And I think Sessions has done a job of devolving this down to Rosenstein. Now, I think the question with Rosenstein, particularly when you get the Southern District of Manhattan involved in this whole Cohen thing, it looks like the Southern District of Manhattan's involved in the Trump organization. Now they he refuses to give some sort of briefing to the Gang of Eight. They refuse to give these documents to Nunes. I think now that Rosenstein ought to be, I think you ought to be given a direct order. Very simple. You turn every document associated with this spy over in Cambridge and whatever foreign institution was involved, whether it's MI5, MI6, or anybody else. You give whatever the FBI did. You give whatever the CIA did. You see Clapper and these guys on TV every night, and Brennan, they're just bitter old men. You turn over every document, and if he doesn't turn it over, you give him 24 hours. If he doesn't turn it over, I would fire him, and that's not obstruction of justice. That's giving a law enforcement officer a direct order to turn over documents to Capitol Hill. And if he doesn't do it, I would fire him.
Next on this CNN special, Steve Bannon has complained about the preponderance of immigrants from certain parts of Asia in certain powerful positions in America. So basically you're saying that there are too many people like me in America, and isn't that racist? I want to ask you about immigration. You've said that immigration is the issue on which you are going to destroy the left. You're going to beat the left. You're going to beat progressives. What do you mean?
Because immigration is about not just sovereignty, it's about jobs. Mass illegal, remember the first bucket when we got on the Trump campaign, the first bucket was make mass illegal immigration and legal immigration the central issue about jobs. Mass illegal immigration is the chamber of commerce, right? And a lot of the Republican Party that want to flood the zone because of it's unfair competition for black and Hispanic working class. In other words, you got so much labor, right, that you have basically in agriculture and in oil field services, et cetera, and in service industries, that you have this unlimited pool of labor that you can continue to draw from. Legal immigration at the top is the same thing. You're not going to be able to take the Hispanic and black community from the STEM system in grammar school to our best engineering schools, to computer science, to the great jobs in Silicon Valley, unless you start to limit these H-1B visas and this unfair competition I think they have as American citizens from East Asia and South Asia. And it's no hit to the people from India or from China. They're fantastic, but we have to start to carve some space out, basically by allowing our citizens to get those jobs. And so that's why I've said from day one, the Democratic Party, and particularly the progressive part of Bernie Sanders and the labor movement. The reason I think we can carve off, and I've said this from day one, 25 to a third of the Bernie Sanders populist movement, the economic nationalists, is that at the end of the day, they don't have an answer for immigration. We have to limit mass illegal immigration. And you're starting to see this in the Trump administration. What he's done to limit mass illegal immigration, that's why we have the lowest black unemployment in history, lowest Hispanic unemployment in 20 years, and wages starting to rise, particularly in agriculture and in oil field services and construction.
Is this why Donald Trump has begun to go, particularly with his rhetoric, very hard line on immigration. Is this the strategy that will limit the damage on the midterm? Is this the midterm?
I think you've hit the key. Here's what I think happened is in the first year administration, we clearly had these conflicting voices of the globalists, the Gary Cohens and McMasters, who are good guys, but they come with a such thing, and the nationalists. I think now, as President Trump looks at the midterm election, right, in the Republican Party, Paul Ryan's quit. The Republican Party has had kind of this attitude of we'll fight this congressional district by congressional district, right? What Trump has done, I think, is moved aside the chief of staff. He's now, 5 or 6 people directly report to him. Okay, he's got a new NEC, he's got new NSC, Mick Mulvaney, OMB reports to him, Comms reports to him. He's doing what he wants to do to execute, okay, to execute on his plan. And that plan he sees is the promises he made up until build the wall, which I'll get to in a second. This is clearly playing, I think, for November 6th of 2018, it's going to be a base plus election, okay? And if you want to limit, and by the way, it's up or down vote on impeachment. Trump is on the ballot in every congressional district. This is not going to be some Democratic congressman versus Republican congressman. This is going to be Donald Trump versus Nancy Pelosi and Tom Steyer.
And he's nationalizing it using immigration.
You're going to see more of this. You're going to see more of the central beating heart issues. Immigration is definitely going to be one.
He's picking on football players who happen to be black. Is that part of it?
Well, no. I think, no. Actually, in the opposite. I think that's what you see in Kanye West. I think what he's doing is that the black America is now understanding, hey, I got the lowest unemployment in history. My wages are finally starting to rise. What this guy's saying is making a lot of sense. It's not about a minimum wage of $15. It may cost $20 to flip a hamburger at McDonald's. What we have to do is limit this unfair competition. The working class blacks and Hispanics have been hit more than any other segment of our country, okay? And these are some of our best patriots. They're the guys in the U.S. Army. They're the guys in the rifle platoons in the Marine Corps. That working class black and Hispanic have been eviscerated between the financial collapse and this unlimited competition they have from foreign labor. That's what's got to stop. And by the way, Trump, I think, this is going to be an up or down vote on November 6th. I think he understands that this is going to be about impeachment, the tax cuts, all the economy will go up underneath this. But the Republicans have been running these ads on tax cuts alone. It's not going to resonate. This is going to be an emotional, you're either with Nancy Pelosi or you're with Donald Trump. So to a degree, remember, the Democrats have questioned his legitimacy from the very beginning, this nullification project. The one thing that Democrats in the opposition party media, CNN, you guys got one thing right. You're going to get your do-over. Trump's second presidential race will be on November 6th of this year. He's on the ballot, and we're going to have an up or down vote. Do you back Trump's program, okay, with all its good and all its bad? Do you back Trump's program, or do you back removing him? Because that's what Pelosi and Tom Steyer and these guys want.
You say you're not a racist, and I take you at face value. But I want to ask you about the policies and their intended or unintended consequences, because they would sure as hell attract a lot of people as supporters who are avowedly racist. And I think about an exchange you had with Donald Trump on Breitbart Radio. It was very interesting. Trump said that he was in favor of high-skilled immigrants. And you said, well, wait a minute, if you're going to end up with 2/3 of Silicon Valley CEOs being from South Asia, and then you paused and you said, a country is more than an economic community.
Yes.
So basically you're saying that there are too many people like me in America, and isn't that racist?
No. Let's talk about it. Economic nationalism doesn't care about your race, your ethnicity, your religion, doesn't care about your gender, doesn't care about your religion, doesn't care about what your sexual preference is. It cares about if you're a United States citizen.
But those people are all in Silicon Valley. They are American citizens. They have
we don't know. We don't. Hang on. We don't know.
They may look different.
No. We don't know what's come through by HB1 visas or not. What I'm saying is that we can't get this country sorted out until we've now taken the entire elementary school and made it science, technology, engineering, and math.
But you're evading that, Steve. With all due respect, what that answer implied was they'd come from the wrong culture. If they came from the right culture, if I was white and Christian,
by the way,
you might have a different reaction.
Makes absolutely no difference.
No? What do you mean?
By the way, if you're from Asia and you're here, second generation, you're an American citizen, absolutely no problem. These HB1 visas, where you come here and basically to take the jobs of American citizens, is just not acceptable, and that's not racist. American citizens. By the way, the central beating heart of this is that Hispanics and blacks have to get into the high value-added tech jobs. We're never going to do that as long as they have unfair competition. Remember, when Sessions and I first started this back...
By the way, you're not also going to do that by gutting spending. I mean, you're celebrating the deconstruction of the administrative state, but it is all those scholarships and programs and pre-K and nutrition programs that help poor people rise up. And I don't understand why.
By the way, we just passed a $4.3 trillion budget. They didn't cut a penny. In fact, they added to all the programs. When they added to the defense programs, they added to all these other programs. By the way, we didn't cut one penny out of those programs. We have one point. By the way, it's 1.3 trillion of discretionary spending. We have $1 trillion deficits in structurally now in the future.
Because of a $1.5 trillion tax cut to the rich.
$1.5 trillion tax cut was supposed to be, the concomitant part was supposed to be some pretty significant cuts in the budget. And by the way, the permanent political class failed to do it. When President Trump finally woke up to the fact that he had been sold a bill of goods, remember, he's saying that, hey, this will never happen again. One of the events to watch in this coming election before November 6th, September 30th is the end of this end of the appropriations year. He has already said, I'm not kicking the can down the road anymore. We're not going to have any of these CRs. And that's why you're starting to see on Capitol Hill now, people are talking about, we have to get this done before the August recess.
Okay, I got to get a few more things.
But by the way, what I'm saying is that I think that what President Trump's doing in nationalizing this, the wall is central. The wall is not just totemic. The wall is absolutely central to his program. I believe that what he's going to do is, as we come up on September 30th, if that appropriations bill does not include spending to fully build his wall, not some $1.6 billion for prototypes, I mean to build the southern wall, I believe he will shut down the government. I believe the government will actually shut down in the run-up to the election.
You've been really nice about Donald Trump in this interview, and yet he calls you Sloppy Steve. He says you've lost your mind. He says you had nothing to do with his election. What's your response?
He's Donald Trump. I think he's doing a fantastic job. Look, every day is going to be different, so you gotta swing with it. You know, I knew Trump for many, many years before I stepped into the campaign. Not really well.
Has he privately called you to tell you, Steve, I'm just kidding?
No, trust me, he does not do that. But look, every action he's taking, I am really happy with. I think he's got the right, with Larry Kudlow, the right guy at the NEC. I think with John Bolton,
he's a total free trader.
Well, but by the way, look what he did. The first interview that Larry Kudlow sat down with Peter, sat down with Peter Navarro. But when Larry Kudlow went on CNBC and the CNN with his first interviews, he said, hey, we have to be tough on China. China has treated, has cheated us. You said it in your column 2 months ago. We've got China dead to rights on this thing. They can't happy talk their way. They can't go to Davos and give some big speech about globalization and how the whole world's about free trading when they run as a mercantilist society.
So why did I come all the way to Rome to interview Steve Bannon? Well, Italy's politics were in absolute chaos this week, and Bannon has a lot to say about the subject. Much more on that when we come back.
We're coming up on the 10th year anniversary of the financial crisis. The fuse that was lit then that eventually brought the Trump revolution is the same thing that's happened here in Italy.
What a week to be in Italy. I was invited here to Rome by Steve Bannon, who has been an avid supporter of the populist movement here, a movement that has created even more political chaos than Italy usually has. The trouble stems from the country's March elections. That vote saw the populist party surge in popularity, rejecting traditional party politics. The parties ran on an Italy first mentality, promising a crackdown on immigration, if that sounds familiar, and the populist coalition also threatened Italy's relationship with the European Union, causing grave concern among many Italians, many Europeans, and also global stock markets. From Italy's own Borsa to markets in London and New York, stocks were tumultuous this week, based in large part on the turmoil in Italy. Steve Bannon is here to support and learn from those Italian populists. In a sense, you think we're in Italy at an unusual moment because this is the future and it might be the United States. So let me set the scene and then you tell me why this is the future. You had a strange left-right coalition, a kind of populist movement with the Five-Star Movement, along with the Northern League, a kind of separatist movement of Northern Italy. They won a majority in the election. Why is this the future, and what does it mean for the politics in the West?
We're coming up on the 10th year anniversary of the financial crisis, the financial collapse that happened in September of 2008, as you remember, in the presidential election of Obama and John McCain. The implosion of those world capital markets, right, has never really been sorted out. The fuse that was lit then that eventually brought the Trump revolution is the same thing that's happened here in Italy. You've had this kind of stagnant economy. Economy today is actually smaller than it was in 2008. You've had a populist and a nationalist movement kind of form, one in the north and one in the south. What happened that was so amazing, the reason I came over here and kind of saw this Trump rally type intensity, you had a full vetting of particularly the center parties, the traditional center parties, in this populist and nationalist movement on the right and the populist movement on the left. They won. And in fact, 2/3 of the vote that took place in March was really anti-establishment. They're saying, hey, we want to try something different. What was most amazing, they talked about big ideas, and they had incredible participation by young people. Okay, young people were really engaged, particularly on the 5-Star Movement, which was really an internet-based movement.
And that's the only populist movement in Europe, at least, that draws young people.
Yes, for right now. I mean, you do have some young people in these populist movements, but the 5-Star Movement is a young person's movement, right? It's quite compelling, not just from the South, but it draws young people. They then, over the 8-week period, and I was pretty vocal after the election in the media here saying, you know, it would really be interesting if they tried to put together, leave the old dichotomy of left and right aside and try to put together a unity government that united North and South.
You see this as sort of like Sanders plus Trump.
Absolutely. I see this as elements of the Sanders movement and elements of the Trump movement, the Trump base. And what was most important, and I think for an American audience or a world audience, is what 5-Star represents is really anti-crony capitalism and, hey, it's the political class, the permanent political class that has really foisted this burden upon us. We want to get rid of all those guys. These people are not, they're not really schooled in government. I mean, the head of it, DeMaio, was formerly a waiter. I think the mayor of Rome, who's a woman, the young mayor of Rome, I think she was formerly a secretary. So this is really people from everyday walks of life that's saying we're the anti-political party. In 80 days, what was amazing, they put aside their differences of North and South, right and left, and came together with a government in a 56-page or 60-page document that laid out flat tax, how they were going to do this guaranteed income, right, but kind of a graduate thing, really well thought through on the migrant issue, on flat tax, on growing the economy, getting the economy back up to 3%.
Broadly speaking, fair to say that the policy was sort of left-wing on economics, but right-wing on things like immigration?
Except for the flat tax. Yep. The flat tax is a libertarian. I mean, this is the Steve Forbes, Rand Paul dream of putting a flat tax. Around Central Europe, you're starting to see Hungary, Poland, some other countries experiment with it. This would be, remember, Italy is the 4th largest economy in the one of the founding members. I think it's the 8th largest economy in the world. It's still a major industrial power. You know, people forget that. This is just not a place for tourism. It's a major industrial power, particularly in the north. They were going to go to the 15% flat tax, which is pretty radical. But here's my point. It was well thought through. This was not wide-eyed. And here's what's most impressive about DeMaio and Salvini, the two leaders. They put their egos aside. They put another guy up, an unknown law professor, as the prime minister, and then they put a guy, Dr. Savano, who is an expert in the EU and actually the euro. Now, he's quite controversial because he said from day one, hey, this whole thing's a German cage, and they got us locked in, right? France is killing us, and Germany's killing us. But they put him forward as a finance minister. And the central guys rejected it.
And how will this come to America? Why do you think American elites are similarly dismissive?
I think after the Tea Party revolt of 2010, which saw 62 seats go in the House, kind of petered out a little bit with the Romney campaign and Obama. What I saw in the European elections in 2014 with Nigel Farage, the kind of beginning, the reinvigoration of this populist movement. Europe is about a year ahead of the United States. And I think you're seeing now pieces being put together where you see populist nationalist movements with reform, with people are saying, hey, it's the permanent political class, and what we have to do is get rid of these politicians, get involved citizens. And that's, I think, the power you're seeing here. You could begin to see the elements of Bernie Sanders coupled with the Trump movement that really becomes a dominant political force in American politics.
Next on this CNN special, Trump has yet to build his wall, and his tax cut disproportionately helps corporations and people who are already rich. Has the Trumpian revolution, as Bannon envisioned it, failed? I asked Steve Bannon.
Remember, I was a guy that argued there ought to be a 44% tax for the upper brackets, right? But that was kind of dismissed early on. You have to make manufacturing competitive in the United States, and that's the heart of that tax. And by the way, it hasn't come back.
Investment hasn't come back.
No.
The estate tax exemption has been doubled. Steve, 0.2% of Americans pay estate taxes. 0.2.
But
this is not the 1%.
Fareed, I do disagree, because I think sometimes you're caught up in too much process.
So you think at the heart of this populism that you see sweeping the Western world is a kind of economic populism to take care of these working class people who have been often left behind. So I wonder, 500 days into the Trump administration, the signature achievement of the Trump administration has been a tax cut that has basically been disproportionately to the wealthy, to corporations. There hasn't been much return of manufacturing jobs. You gave a speech once where you said there are three things they got to do. They got to control immigration. You got to take care of, bring back jobs from China and get out of these wars.
Yeah.
None of that's happened. There's no wall. There's no jobs back from China. They were still in Afghanistan.
Let's go with tax.
What we have is a big tax cut. I can't believe you approved of that tax cut.
Let's go to the tax cut. Remember, when we first came in, Paul Ryan and guys had been working on for 7 or 8 years the border adjustable tax. That was very much made on the model of Germany to make us more of an export nation, heavy inducement to manufacturing, 100% expensing of capital equipment, period zero. That blew up in the first 90 days. The Cokes and Walmart and the retailers said this is going to be a value-added tax. We got to get rid of this thing. Then the Trump program was, I believe, in the center of it, I think is quite wise, because what they did is said, hey, if we can't get anything else done, what we have to do is get competitive with Germany, and we have to get competitive with China as far as taxes go and repatriation. The heart of it, remember, I was a guy that argued there ought to be a 44% tax for the upper brackets, right? But that was kind of dismissed early on. But the beating heart of it, and I think even the reason populists came together, it was a major first step for trying to get investment back to the United States. You have to make manufacturing competitive in the United States, and that's the heart of that tax. And by the way,
it hasn't come back. Investment hasn't come back. Instead, the estate tax exemption has been doubled. Steve, 0.2% of Americans pay estate taxes. 0.2. This is not the 1%.
Fareed, I do disagree, because I think sometimes you're caught up in too much process. Here's the thing, is that it's a beginning. Directionally, you are starting to see the animal spirit. You are starting to see reinvestment in the country. That's one of the reasons we were 3% growth at the fourth quarter of last year. Now we're 2.2% this year, but the projection is up to 3% growth. A lot of that is for the reinvestment in manufacturing. Now, was it a perfect tax cut, and is it a perfect populist tax cut? The answer is no. But is it? I think it's starting to rejuvenate the American economy and kind of gives us an engine to drive. The answer is yes. And I think you're going to see President Trump later in his first term and then in his second term start to address maybe the inequalities in our tax code, which should have been addressed in the Ryan bill, but that kind of blew up very early on in the administration.
Okay, so then the other part to your
But by the way, one thing about the elites, here's the thing. I don't believe that people focus enough on what started this. And it's interesting, your show started about 10 years ago. The financial crisis of 2008, brought on by the elites of both parties, okay, where they bailed themselves out. Remember, that was when Bernanke and Paulson went up to Bush's White House, said we need $1 trillion. This is when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt on the 15th. The administration let it go in. The smartest guys the geniuses didn't realize that Lehman Brothers was the heart of the world's commercial paper market. The whole economy started to blow apart. They go up to Bush and said, hey, we need $1 trillion by 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
I got it, Steve, but the point is,
but they took
the same people who bailed themselves out, you're giving them another tax cut. That's what I don't understand.
But is that
the price you're paying to keep the Republican Party with you? Be honest. You're paying a price to the Republican establishment.
Well, listen, when we first got into the campaign, you have to bring in, remember, we're a coalition. We're a coalition of the Republican establishment and this kind of populist nationalist movement, and it takes both to win. We're very cognizant of that. I do believe, though, the heart of his tax cut was these corporations to be competitive overseas with Germany and China, and I think it's a winner. My point with the establishment, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve in September 2008 was about $880 billion. It's $4.5 trillion a day. The same crisis happened in the Eurozone. What the elites did was flood the zone with liquidity, to raise assets, right, to inflate assets so there wasn't deflation and a collapse of the financial markets. And so you've had both in the Eurozone here, if you own real estate, stocks, or intellectual property, it's the greatest 10-year run in history. The working guy has been stiff the entire time. And that is the revolt that led to Donald Trump, and that's what you're seeing here in Italy and throughout the rest of the continent. And by the way, the elites don't have a response. You've seen what has stunned me in being over here is the arrogance. If people in the United States think Washington is arrogant to the heartland of the country, it is nothing compared to what Brussels and the City of London are to these individual countries. I mean, they have basically dismissed. Here you had an election where 2/3 of the people voted anti-establishment parties. Almost 50% voted for Five Star and for the League. And yet they just completely dismissed, after putting together a government, they completely dismissed and said not acceptable.
Stay with me here. I have much more of my interview with Steve Bannon coming up. When we come back, I'll ask him, did Donald Trump take over the GOP, or did the GOP take over Donald Trump? So the second part of your program was bringing jobs back from China. And I'm wondering, again, you look at what is happening with the administration. There's a lot of talk on being tough on trade. There's been very little action. Steve Mnuchin has walked back a lot of the comments. And then the president, your president, throws a lifeline to ZTE, a Chinese company that is basically, exists on American technology, and says he's doing it because he's worried about Chinese jobs. You must have freaked when you
had a column a couple of weeks ago that I could not disagree with more. It was about Trump as a negotiator and versus a marketer, okay? Let's step back for a second. We've been told with the rise of China, both from the cheerleaders, the rational accommodationists, and even the hawks, that it was inexorable that the rise of China. Donald Trump has done something extraordinary that Wall Street and the corporatists told us could not be done. He's gotten 3 weapons or 3 tools in his toolbox now. One is tariffs on a massive scale we haven't seen before. The $50 billion we're talking about, but then there's another $100 billion after that and another $100 billion after that. So maybe up to $250 billion of tariffs, okay? Number 2 is the 301, which for people is where China forces us, not steals our intellectual property, forces us to give the intellectual property access their environment. And the last is these actions like ZTE, where we literally can implode a company by cutting them off from the supply chain.
But the action so far, you're talking about talk.
No, okay, hold on.
The action has been to throw a lifeline to ZTE.
No, hang on for a second. Okay, but remember, there's the whole thing about a grand bargain with China. Do we try to set the geostrategic balance with China for the next 50 years? And that's one of the things I think President Trump's working through. On top of that, he's got not just the South China Sea, he's got North Korea. So he's got to balance these 2 flashpoints in the world, which probably are the 2 of the 3 most intense flashpoints where war can actually start. In doing that, he has brought, remember, before...
You're just not answering the ZT,
hang on, but
no.
The Wall Street has told us all we have is the blunt instrument of the SWIFT system or cutting them off from capital markets. Trump has brought in 3 weapons at the same time and put China on the back foot. Remember, Liu He came over here for the simple reason they had a sense of urgency. For the first time...
Head of the Chinese economy.
And one of the most brilliant guys in the world, okay? He doesn't get on a plane and come over here with a sense of urgency for nothing. They've always wanted just to tap us along and have these strategic conversations. In there... And you have, obviously, a split in the administration. You have more of the Wall Street guys with Mnuchin that want to kind of accommodate, okay, and to Stephen's defense, work out some deal in the short term that can list. And then you've got the hawks, the Lighthisers, the Navarros, the Millers, the nationalists that say no. We finally got China where we want them. And I think, the president kind of, his negotiating strategy is give a little, take a little, et cetera. Here's where I think we are. Both in NAFTA, around the world, we're at the beginning stages of a major renegotiation of the economics of the United States and how we are, how we are treated throughout the world and what our place is in the world. It's at the heart, as you said a couple of months ago, of the Republican Party and the reformation of the Republican Party. His biggest enemies in this are the Republican Party, and it shouldn't be lost on people. When Lee Hook came, his first day, he went to Capitol Hill. He went to Capitol Hill because he knew that's where the free traders are, right? So he had some, some basic backing to say, when I go into these negotiations, I understand that Congress is full of free traders, right? From the Heritage and Cato, and also some Democrats, but I got free traders there. Trump, I think, has done an amazing job. He's taken us farther than anybody's ever gone with China. He's now got real engagement, and we're going to see, it's not going to happen overnight, but you're going to see in the next 6 months to a year, I think, a real recalibration of the relationship with China. We'll really put America first, and we're going to stop being treated as a tributary state. Remember, right now, it's barbarian management 101, right? We are Jamestown to their Great Britain. We basically send them raw materials, natural gas, soybeans, hogs, and they send us back. Advanced manufacturing.
So let me ask you, from the point of view of somebody in the Republican establishment, and I've talked to a few of them actually after that column you referenced, and they said, look, from our point of view, things are working out fine. Trump talks stuff on some of these things, very little actually happens. The stuff that gets implemented is the core Republican agenda. And what you're going to see is he's going to make some of these attempts at protectionism. But look what the reality is. He's doubled down on Afghanistan. He's doubled down on Iraq. He's more engaged militarily in all those wars that you wanted him to get out of. There is no wall. There is no great tariff war with China right now. So when they look at it, it seems to me they're saying Donald Trump hasn't taken over the Republican Party. The Republican Party has taken over Donald Trump.
Okay, let me beg to differ for 1 second. You have to remember is that what he is doing is the right-wing populism is different than populism you see in Europe. Europe, even at the end of the day, always looked for a state solution. Part of what right-wing populism is deconstructing the administrative state, getting rid of a lot of the regulations, opening up entrepreneur opportunities for working class people, okay, and getting more of a piece of the action for the working class and the lower middle class. What Trump has done with judges, what Trump has done with his massive deregulation, which is really under the surface, it's deconstructing the administrative state, totally plays to the populist agenda, okay? The one area, and by the way, remember, these trade deals are enormously complicated, right? The trade deals, since we walked away from TPP, you've got all these bilateral deals he's trying to do. We're deep into it with NAFTA. He started to engage the EU. We're very deep into it with China, into the fact that we've just laid on $50 billion in tariffs, right? And so, and by the way, he's making progress on these every day. Now let's talk about Afghanistan and the wars. The central thesis of the Trump movement and Donald Trump is America first. It's not American isolationists or America alone. What he looks at is he does this in a very sophisticated way I think the national security community doesn't quite get yet. He says, look, the post-war liberal rules-based order that came after World War II is essentially today from Europe, the Persian Gulf, the Straits of Malacca and the South China Sea and the Northwest Pacific is essentially that combination of trade relationships, commercial relationships, capital markets, and security guarantees and alliances is basically underwritten by the American taxpayer. Okay, underwritten by the American taxpayer, and it's the deplorables where that tax burden goes. In addition, it's their kids in the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan, it's their kids in the South China Sea, it's their kids on the peninsula of Korea. It's the deplorables are saying, hey, there has to be a recalibration of this. It's not that America's backing off from this, but America is more than an expeditionary humanitarian military force that's there to be the world's cop and to pay for it. So in NATO, that's where he says, hey, it's got to be 2%. Right, it's got to be 2%, and you have to be an ally. You're not going to be a protector.
But that's stuff Obama also said, and the point is.
But the difference is that President Trump.
There are more troops now, and there are more bombs, and there's more engagement. But look,
no. But hang on, this is an important point. This is an important point because what he's doing, whether it's in the Northwest Pacific with Japan or Korea, right? He's engaging our allies to say, hey, look. This has to work for America overall. So Korea, I'm going to renegotiate our trade deal. At the same time, we talk about the security alliance, and at the same time, we talk about the THAAD system. The same time, we talk about you paying for the THAAD system. The same thing in Japan. And by the way, it's the foreign policy community that has bifurcated this. Donald Trump has looked at this as a very practical businessman and saying you can't bifurcate these. These are inextricably linked, both our trade relationships and our national security. And that engagement, so people, the first thing the opposition party media says about him, he's an isolationist. He wants America just to go alone. It's the exact opposite. If you look at everywhere, it's engagement, including in Iran. Remember, in Iran, it's the frontline nations of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Israel, and Jordan, and Bahrain that are the ones that are the biggest cheerleaders for what he's done. So if you look around the world, it's the exact opposite as he's been portrayed.
America seems to be deeply polarized under Donald Trump. European countries are also being torn apart. How would Steve Bannon end this wave of polarization and bring people back together? I ask him when we come back.
I keep saying if Bernie Sanders had been more confrontational and had more stones, he would have been the nominee and would have had a real fight with Donald Trump.